Okay, so which Australian sports team do you reckon has the best away fans? Because actually, I reckon it might not even be an Aussie team. At Magic Round, the New Zealand Warriors took over Brisbane and they turned an away game at Suncorp Stadium into something that felt a lot like home. But this is more than about just passionate fans, because the Warriors might just be building one of the most commercially interesting brands in sport in Australia and New Zealand by understanding something about identity and belonging and modern fandom that other clubs could learn from. Let's talk about this some more, because if you want to know what's really going on in sport, you got to follow the money.
And now it's time.
It's time.
It's time for
Moneyball.
Moneyball.
Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball?
Hey team, welcome to Moneyball, the business of sport, the show for sports insiders and for fans that want to know what is really going on in the game. How you doing? I'm your host, Scott Keenan, and if you like the show, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or give us a review and a rating on Apple Podcasts. Now, every club in every code does things differently, from fan engagement to sponsorship, content and match day experiences. There is no one size fits all for how to do all that stuff right. But the New Zealand Warriors are becoming one of the most commercially interesting operations in Australia and New Zealand sport. They are doing things differently, and they're building something pretty special around a team that is also performing on the field. Joining me to break it down is sports marketing academic, consultant and commentator Dr Sarah Wymer. Sarah is a senior lecturer in sport leadership and management at Auckland University of Technology, working at the intersection of fan engagement, digital strategy and sports partnerships. Sarah, big thank you for joining me on the show here. And can I start by asking, you are a Warriors fan, right?
Yes, I am a Warriors fan, so I may be a little biased in some of my answers, but I am one of their original fans. I was at the first ever game in '95, went along with my dad at 5 years old, which is going to age me here on the podcast, but along to the first game. Grew up in a really league loving family, which is quite unique being in New Zealand back in the 90s. A very rugby union dominant city and country back in the 90s. It's all we've ever watched. Season ticket holder up until I moved to Australia in 2013, and then lived there for 10 years. So experiences will speak to both of those, New Zealand and Australia fans.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, so you can see both sides of the fence. And
Yes.
After all those years, you're finally on trend now, because the Warriors are flying high in New Zealand, which I love. And I'm so glad to talk to you about it today. Every club has fans and activations at Magic Round, but this year for the Warriors, I thought it felt a little bit different. What stood out to you about their presence in Brisbane this year? And did it feel something a little bit bigger to you than just a travelling supporter base?
Yeah, I definitely think we're seeing a real clear nation of the Warriors in Queensland. We know that recently they have committed with the city of Logan and have a real presence in Logan. And we can now see the kind of flow-on effects of that. And what we're seeing there was that reportedly 8,000 to 10,000 fans travelled for Magic Round. I definitely think the Warriors going well on the field definitely contributes to some of that success and people jumping on the bandwagon, which they've always done for a number of years. But what really stood out to me was that the way that the Warriors activated outside of the main game. We saw the pop-up store in Queen Street Mall in Brisbane, which is prime real estate to have a pop-up store. And we also saw pop-up merchandise being sold at the Auckland airport as well, which was huge to see a space that traditionally All Blacks dominate at airports, and having the Warriors merchandise there really cements that travelling fan base who are passing through on the way to the game.
Yeah, because that would feel like a really great experience, right? You're making the effort to go follow your team overseas, but to be able to get some of the latest gear, maybe a jersey, a scarf, a beanie, it kind of you start your experience at the airport.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even beyond the buying element of it, just seeing Warriors branding at the airport really segments that further. There's a real clear presence to the Warriors taking over space and seeing their logos and seeing their presence at the airport as part of that immediate journey. The pop-up store in Brisbane, The queues there were huge.
The other thing on that as well is that the amount of money that they put through that store. They did over $100,000 a day each day for 5 days in Brisbane. So they put $500,000 through that joint just over the course of Magic Round. It's not just about the sales. It says something more about a bigger story here about the Warriors, both in New Zealand and in Australia. They really created an atmosphere. And do you think like a place for fans to connect outside of the ground?
Yeah, definitely. They had a Play On podcast live broadcast from there. So Sean Johnson has been
Yes.
a real clear figure as a Play On Sports podcast, as well as Brooke Roscoe from The Morning Shift, which has quite a clear demographic split across the two audiences. But having Sean as kind of the face of that podcast and doing the live there, it was a real activation zone where fans could be part of something and kind of express their fandom beyond just coming to buy merchandise, player appearances and things at the store. So even if you weren't going to buy merchandise, I think people were just there to be part of it. And I think that pop-up store also really speaks to someone I saw on Twitter saying that previously, the year before, they could not find a piece of Warriors merchandise anywhere in Brisbane or the Gold Coast. Rebel Sports said that it was outselling every other NRL team. So their Warriors really clearly know that demand that fans want to buy merchandise. So therefore really speaking and leaning into that, hearing the fans' voice, we want to buy merchandise. It's not available at Rebel or anywhere else. How can we really clearly speak to the fan and provide them what they want?
Do you think it's travelling fans, or do you think that there's something about Kiwis in Queensland, as a location where there is a bit of, a growing group of people who want to connect with the club back home?
Yeah, definitely. As someone who lived in Queensland for 11 years, I definitely think it is a lot of fans who live there as well. There are 618,000 New Zealand-born people living in Australia. So that's a huge segment of the market. 37% of those live in Queensland. So there's almost more Kiwis living in Queensland and Brisbane than outside of Auckland itself. So that's a huge population to potentially target. I also think that if you're a Kiwi in Brisbane, you're more likely to buy merchandise, engage with the Warriors, because that's your connection to home. In New Zealand, it's entertainment, we see it all the time, whereas that is your one point of connection, maybe 2-3 times, depending on if they're playing the Dolphins, the Titans,
or if Lord's touring.
Yeah, exactly right. But it's that potential for that connection and more willing to express yourself. So, having a pop-up store in Brisbane as a Kiwi, more likely to go in and buy something than a Kiwi who might, see it every single day at Rebel Sport. It's always there, but that unique kind of opportunity to buy something like that, potentially as a Kiwi living in Australia, more willing to purchase that merchandise.
Yeah, and the thing that I thought about this was, maybe think about my trips to Melbourne for Formula One. I've gone to the Grand Prix a few times there, and when you see Formula One arrive in any city, you don't just get a race, you get fan zones and retail and experiences and activations across the city, and you can spend the whole weekend engaging with that brand like so many people seem to have done with the Warriors over Magic Round. Do you think the club did approach it a little bit more like a major global sports property than just a traditional rugby league weekend?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think we're kind of seeing that extend beyond just that one-off touch point at Magic Round as well. Previously to Magic Round, the Warriors also had a pop-up store in Wellington, and they also had one in Christchurch as well. I know that the Wellington pop-up store did over $52,000 in 2 days, and just match day $150,000. So they are definitely pulling in the numbers no matter where they're going, which shows that there's fans in each of these cities outside of its home city of Auckland who are willing to purchase. And I think that the Warriors are really know that Southeast Queensland market is a market to capture, and ability to build a fan experience beyond the 90 minutes of play is a real key activation to extend that experience to those touch points, which are previously were limited, but we're really seeing an expansion of that further.
And look, I think it is easy to look at the crowds and the merchandise sales and say that the Warriors are just simply kind of riding this wave of popularity. I watched a recent game at Campbelltown Oval where the Warriors played the Tigers, and I swear there was more Warriors fans than Tigers fans there for that game. But under the club's current ownership, they do seem to have sort of built this stability, these strong commercial partnerships and activations that feel quite different to the traditional NRL model. How much of this do you think is organic fan momentum, and how much do you think is smart commercial strategy by the club?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of both. I think that the fans have really taken a huge uptake into the Warriors brand. It's all of a sudden become cool to be a Warriors fan. I know back in '95, there was periods where I know the marketing team was selling the opposition as the main spectacle. So
Yeah,
using the
right.
Panthers and the Bulldogs to actually sell tickets to the Warriors game, and they were heavily discounted. There was a lot of 2-for-1s. There was a lot of entertainment selling the Warriors products. So the Warriors haven't been cool all this time, and I definitely think a lot of that comes to smart marketing. I've heard the Warriors marketing team speak numerous times about what COVID did for them and the ability to refresh their brand and their marketing and kind of really invest in who they are, what makes them unique. And also for a New Zealand consumer, you don't really know what you have until it's gone, and that
Yep.
period of disengagement with touch points for such a long period of time, when they came back, it really revitalized that fan connection. But I do also think, yes, it's become cool. The Up the Wires movement was fan driven and really lent into, but I do think a lot of that is very, very smart marketing by the club. And as we saw recently, Warriors are now going to be activating at Dreamworld, so going to be called Wires World. Interesting, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen by accident. That is very, very smart commercially to see an activation like that.
So is that a partnership between Dreamworld and the club?
Yeah, so that's a partnership between Dreamworld and the Warriors. It is a 3-year partnership. So again, speaking to, it's not just a spur of the moment thing. It's a real strategic investment for a 3-year deal. They've got their first activation in round 22. So coming up soon, the 27th of July weekend. And it's aligned with when they play the Gold Coast Titans. So they've got their Koalas and Warriors jerseys. They've got, branded stuff. If you're a New Zealand passport holder, you get cheaper access passes, all these kinds of things, which really speaks to that segment of the market, which is heavily based around Coomera and the Northern Gold Coast. And it's been interesting looking at the sentiment of how people have responded to that, because obviously there's almost this kind of sentiment that the Warriors are overtaking a market that already exists, right? They're coming taking the Gold Coast Titans, the Brisbane Broncos, who have market share of that area. And there's an external club coming in and saying, we're stealing your fans. But what I thought was interesting is that the Titans are already partnered with Movie World. So there is an opportunity for someone like the Warriors to come in and leverage those partnerships quite differently. And there's also this argument that a Warriors fan is a Warriors fan. You're not stealing fans from another segment, because Kiwis moving to Australia are still Warriors fans. You're not stealing people you're trying to convert to be Titans fans, because it's quite a different strategy in stealing fans rather than maybe adopting a second team. These are Warriors fans first, and that is already that segment of the market that exists.
I think you could argue that there's an underserviced audience that already exists of Kiwis who are in the Gold Coast and Southeast Queensland, and they're just tapping into that. Clubs have to think outside the square to build their brands and their audiences over time. They can't just sit in their little fiefdoms and expect that they'll be able to grow and continue to be able to deliver, bigger, better experiences for the same small group of fans. What do you reckon other NRL clubs can specifically learn from?
That's a really interesting one. I've kind of grappled this for a really long time, because it is quite a unique case. There's not many sport organizations or sporting leagues in the world where you've got international fans that have moved away, but you can still watch your team play in the local league. So it's quite a unique case. What I think a lot of the clubs in the NRL could lead from is really listening to the fans. I think a lot of the Warriors has been, really cultural driven, really listening to the fans. They lean into humor. They're not afraid to post after a loss a meme or kind of a joke, things like that. They don't take themselves too seriously. And I think that, there's always this kind of thought process of, this could be our year, but then also it might not be our year. And I think just being honest with your fans has really allowed them to kind of capitalize and try things out and try new things, because they have that trust with fans that, has been built up over time. But being vulnerable has really allowed the kind of commercial playground, I can almost call it, to experiment with things, because they are that team that can experiment and be vulnerable.
Why do you think being further from home can actually strengthen someone's connection to a sports team?
Yeah, I definitely think that a Warriors home game in Auckland is seen as entertainment. You're competing with the Auckland Blues, Auckland FC, Moana Pacifica. You've got different options for entertainment, but a Warriors game in Australia as a Kiwi is quite different. It's that chance to connect with people that are like-minded. It's a place to showcase, I'm from New Zealand, this is my identity. So therefore, it extends beyond an entertainment option. It becomes more of this dysphoria reunion where you can connect with other Kiwis and showcase your connection to New Zealand through the Warriors. And I think that also makes them quite more commercially viable in Australia. So as a Kiwi, they've got a big activation with V Energy. So you can go to your local server or petrol station and you can buy a V Energy can, which is Warriors branded. You get socks and things at your local gas station in New Zealand. I see that all the time. I see it. I look past it, twice a week when I'm filling up on New Zealand's very expensive petrol.
Yeah. It's expensive here too, don't worry.
Yes. It's nearly $3 here, so it's pretty rough here.
Yeah.
I see it there. That kind of brand image is, constantly in my mind. I'm not, thinking, wow, this is unique. This is something different. I'm not likely to purchase it to show my extension of being a Warriors fan. As a Kiwi in Australia, if that V Energy can popped up in my Upper Coomera local petrol station, I'm more likely to want to buy multiple of those products because that is my connection to show that I am a Warriors fan. That's my connection to home. So I think potentially if Warriors are commercially smart, we'll see a lot more of those sponsorship activations popping up into the Australian market because there's a whole heap of Kiwis who want to extend and showcase and be part of that identity that makes them really commercially viable, that potentially is a little bit undertapped in the Australian market, that doesn't quite replicate what's happening in New Zealand, and almost more commercially viable as an Australian, a Kiwi in Australia.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to see more of that happening here alongside like those fan events and experiences that maybe you might expect at a Magic Round or in Vegas when you travel there and there's all the circus around that. But why couldn't the Warriors have fan events at every away game in Australia to connect with the fans that are in each of those areas? The Warriors do feel incredibly relevant, and I'm interested to know, as somebody living in New Zealand and studying this, is rugby league having a genuine sort of cultural moment in New Zealand right now?
Yeah, definitely. As an example, the All Blacks are playing on Saturday night and the Warriors are playing on Saturday night as well. One's at Eden Park, one's at Mount Smart Stadium, both scheduled to kick off at the same time. And as a reference point, I was just scrolling the comments because I like to call that work and doing my market research on social media.
I'm with you.
And majority of people were saying there's no choice. I'll be watching the Warriors this weekend.
Wow.
So it's
really
interesting to see that shift of people saying, I'm watching the Warriors over the All Blacks. A few years ago, it wouldn't even be a choice. It would be, the All Blacks are our number one, and really seeing that shift in consumption. In fact, there's no more tickets for any home games left for the rest of the 2026 season for the Warriors, which is crazy considering we're in a cost of living crisis, but people can still afford to take themselves to the Warriors. Sold out, no more tickets left for 2026. Whereas the All Blacks only just sold out last week. So also speaks to, priorities of where people are going and where people are investing their time. We're also seeing a rise in grassroots sport and participation in rugby league uptake. As an example, my daughter plays under sevens and in rugby league, and they just don't have the coaches to fulfill the teams. There's so much of a surge of increase of participants who want to play rugby league now. They're also struggling to keep up with the volunteers to fulfill that demand. So great to see a growth in participation. There's also this flow-on effect of, do we have the right officials and the right kind of systems in place to kind of back this increase of participation as well? So great to see a rise, but also some challenges with that huge rise. Rugby Union, as an example, is offering free fees for kids to play rugby union, which I argue is also to combat some of those kids switching to rugby league and trying to encourage them to play. I know a lot of families who live in my area are still choosing rugby league over rugby union, even though fees are in place, because that's what their kids see, that's what their kids know, that's what their kids want to play, which really shows that shift further.
Yeah, I think that's a cool factor, but I also wondered the habit that fans build in New Zealand watching the All Blacks is sort of like staccato and on and off, and you're not actually getting into the rhythm of getting behind a team like they can with the Warriors. That weekly ritual of supporting and watching your team maybe is becoming more embedded in Kiwi society after 30 years of the team being in existence.
Yeah, but I also think that's comparing your national level team with your club team. So, for example, we would be comparing the Kiwis to the All Blacks, and then Super Rugby to the Warriors. And that Super Rugby team does have that continued weekly kind of ritual. Although I see there's a flow-on effect from who's watching Super Rugby, and I'm sure we could almost do a whole podcast on issues and challenges that Super Rugby are facing right now as well. But
so, what is the thing that people are choosing rugby league over rugby union as fans?
Part of that is social media and how it's positioned on social media. It's become very cool. I know, again, in that keynote that we were both at with Victory Lap, for a long time, the All Blacks and rugby has been seen as very prestigious, untouchable, doesn't show emotion, very kind of polished. So people don't feel that connection. Whereas the Warriors and NRL more broadly have been a lot more innovative. They've been creative. They've been a lot more cooler, leaning into the trends. So as a young person, I'm more engaged in watching rugby league because I know those players in a more casual kind of way, as if, like I said, I could see them, sitting on the sideline in a All Blacks game, whereas All Blacks are seen as this prestigious thing that no one can touch. So I think social media has a huge part to play in the access and that level of relatability that a lot of people create those connections through.
Now, the NRL has done a TV deal which includes broadcast on Sky Sport in New Zealand. And from what I've heard and understand, DAZN is very keen to see a 20th team come in maybe a little more quickly than what the NRL had originally thought. There's a lot of talk about it being in New Zealand for the 20th team, perhaps in the South Island. What would a second New Zealand team in the NRL mean for rugby league and for the Warriors, do you think?
Yeah, this might be a little controversial take compared to what others are saying, but I personally don't support another New Zealand team. It's taken us a really, really long time to get to where we are today with the Warriors and rugby league more generally in New Zealand. I think based on where we're at right now, we don't have the support and the kind of structures in place to support another team, even another professional team. The sponsor board and the landscape for sponsors is already quite hard. And I think from a fan perspective, it's also very hard in terms of that kind of market share. I don't think it'd be great for the Warriors. And I think Warriors have created a really big connection. It'll be hard for many people to switch their allegiance to a new team. But I know that we had similar kind of discussions when the Dolphins came in and what that meant for the Broncos and allegiance. Personally, I'm not a fan of another New Zealand team coming in just yet, considering it's taken us so long to get to where we are today. And I'm not sure it's a great move.
You're not just looking at the Warriors and another team for commercial capacity. It's all of the sort of the rugby union universe too, and all of the clubs and the All Blacks and other professional teams that are sort of taking corporate dollars too. So I imagine there's probably not as much to go around as what there might be here.
No, definitely not. And you've got the same kind of brands going for the same things. We've got, netball, we've got football, we've got rugby union and the national teams and all the other high performance teams in New Zealand, and also just not the same amount of brands available to us. We've got Sky TV. That's the only place you can watch sport pretty much. And you've got TVNZ coming in as a bit of a player now, but it's very, very hard to get that commercial dollar. And I think that, splitting the pie even more, we've seen a collapse of Moana Pacifica for a number of reasons earlier this year. And we see issues with ANZ Netball and not having a broadcast agreement in place for next year. So it's already quite hard. Bringing a new professional team in is going to add to that complexity.
Well, Sarah, I've loved bringing a Kiwi voice into the podcast. It's so interesting hearing your perspective about the Warriors, the cultural movement that's happening there, the growth of rugby league, but also the impact on other sports and the things that are happening there. So, hey, thanks so much for being on Moneyball. Really enjoyed talking to you, and I'd love to have you back on the show again in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Moneyball.
And that was so interesting. And, one of the themes that kept coming up, I don't know if we said the word, but the theme that just kept recurring for me was the idea of belonging, because Maybe the Warriors aren't simply selling rugby league. Maybe what they're selling now to their fans and to Kiwis everywhere is connection. Connection to home, connection to culture, and connection to community. Magic Round may have delivered record crowds, millions of viewers, and a massive economic boost for the city of Brisbane. But maybe the bigger story here at Magic Round is happening between Kiwi fans and their footy team. Because when thousands of Warriors fans turn up at an away game and they turn it into a home game, and then a pop-up store becomes more of a gathering place, you know that sport is becoming about much more than just on-field results. So for the rest of this year, it is up the wires. Let's see how they go, and I can't wait to see what happens as they head towards the finals in 2026. If you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe for more breakdowns of the business of sport. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you've got a question, you can ask me anytime. You can email me, askmoneyball.show@gmail.com. Goes straight into my inbox. I'll read it and I'll reply. Thank you for watching and listening. And remember, if you want to know what is really going on in sport, you got to follow the money. I'll see you next time.